Welcome to Rutgers University Newark's School of Public Affairs and Administration's Writing Methods series. This series is designed to help students to improve their writing throughout our program at SPAA. The first session, Writing a Strong Research Paper, is built around the premise that most courses will ask students to approach a topic through the form of a short paper, a response paper, or even a long paper. The method that we'll be discussing today applies to all of them, as well as is a nice opening to begin to prepare for larger projects such as the capstone. First and foremost, we want to talk about the purpose of writing. Writing has three primary purposes: to inform us, persuade, and to entertain. Now, most students are very good at the information part. You're answering a question that is focused on your topic of choice and how it applies to the class. You do your research. In the paper, you inform us of what's going on. Persuasion comes from structure. We ultimately want to make a strong argument in the beginning. We want to follow it up with supporting arguments in the body, and then we want to wrap it up in a conclusion that restates everything that we learned in the paper, but also provides us with any final thoughts moving forward. Finally, entertainment. In the form of public administration papers, that means keep us interested. Why is your topic topical? Why is it interesting? How do you keep us awake? Ultimately, the most interesting aspects of the paper can be added by you, the writer, typically in strong introductions and creative openings, and also in strong conclusions that can bring everything thematically together. But we'll talk about that more as time moves forward. There's different types of writing we'll expect in this program. Most people are very familiar with the first. Expository writing is exposition. Exposition is explanation. You're writing a research paper, it's very informative, and this type of writing is similar to what most students are familiar with from their high school years and from their undergraduate years in English courses. Persuasive writing tends to have an argumentative bend, but you can persuade us of a particular course of action, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a debate. Ultimately, the way to persuade is to provide strong arguments and support them with evidence that you're citing from sources that are credible to public administration courses. Analytical writing ultimately is an exploration of data and the details that we may find. The analytical writing may cover census data and demographic information. It might include financial information. It might include survey information, percentages of people's preferences and that sort of thing. But we will require that of you because as you move forward in the program, you're going to see that there's multiple ways to express your points, and each professor will have a slightly different bend to it. You will not be making the same type of argument in ethics that you will in public budgeting, even if the topic is the same. And then argumentative writing, very similar to persuasion, but with the point and counterpoint in a debate sort of style. You are making a much more thorough argument that is also designed to critique other people's arguments. Now, of the types of writing you're going to do for us, you can expect research papers. Also, as I said, they might be short or long. You can also expect memos. You can expect response papers. That is a professor saying to you, please write about an issue and then respond to it with a policy recommendation or a recommendation from a theme you found in class. You can also expect research design, which is going to prepare you for capstone, as well as statistical analysis, which is also going to prepare you for capstone. When it comes to the structure of writing, what we're going to explore today applies to a paper regardless of its length, and we start with a strong outline. So we're looking to figure out how do we best approach a given topic, and the first thing that we really need to do is make sure that we follow the instructions of the assignment. Your professor is going to give you a prompt. That prompt is going to have information in it which is going to tell us how much you have to do. Now, of course, it's going to tell you how long the paper has to be. It will explain to you what format it has to be in. It's going to be APA format most of the time. But also, if there's any specific areas that you need to focus on, those instructions should be there. If they're not, feel free to reach out to your professor. If there's anything that's vague or confusing that you'd like explored further, or you'd like a sample, reach out to your professor and ask them for clarity. The earlier you do this, the better. If you have a long paper, you can also use subheadings. That is to say, put a title before an introduction, a title before a historical background, moving forward throughout the paper. This is usually good for longer papers, something that's 15 pages, 20 pages. You might want to break it up in a way that's much more digestible for the reader and that allows the reader to skip to important areas of interest. Always brainstorm before you begin. Make sure that you think about what you're interested in and its potential connections to your courses, your interests, and also what's going on in the real world. There's a lot of different ways to approach your given topics. And so if you are only given a few minutes to get your thoughts together, then make sure that you take them. That is to say, if you're doing an in-class essay assignment and you're up against the clock, if you're given 60 minutes, take 10. Brainstorm, write down what you're interested in, number it maybe, or draw lines, arrows, circle things, underline them, figure out how do you want to put your thoughts together, because that 10 minutes can be invaluable in making sure that you hit your timelines and also get everything in that you want to. If it's only a 30-minute time window, take 5 minutes. If it's a 10-minute time window, take 30 seconds. The point is, think before you start writing. And there's multiple ways to handle this, to handle a writing structure. Chronological order is by time. You might organize your paper chronologically forward or backward. In public administration, we're oftentimes looking at older policies that have been written and then applying them to today or talking about how they've done over time. And so consider where you would like to begin. If you begin today, how far back do you need to go? If you start back at a historical precedent, then how far forward? Spatial order. If you're doing something along the lines of mapping, if you're doing something along the lines of giving some sort of instruction and guidance that includes direction, then by all means, you might want to organize things in a way that makes sense spatially, where and when you arrive at a particular place or expectation. Climactic order is about the climax of a paper. That is, what is the most critical point that you're going to be writing about? And then topical order. You might say that I have many topics in this paper. I don't necessarily have an order for them, but they are all important. You decide what topics and what orders you'd like to take them on. We're going to talk about the 5-paragraph essay structure simply because it's simple, it's well known, and my favorite part of it, it is flexible. It is broadly applicable to most papers. What we are looking for is a strong introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Oftentimes, your papers will also involve a works cited page. Just double check in the prompt and make sure that you have what you need from the professor directly. Now, for the introduction, there's a few things to consider, but the first thing I want to emphasize is that this is where your voice is going to be the strongest. It's the first thing that we see, and it's also going to be the place where you have the most flexibility. There's different ways to do a strong opening, and later on in the semester, there will be a dedicated presentation for strong openings, but I just want to emphasize here that there's different ways to get our attention. You might do it in a journalistic way, providing an important headline in the title. You might do it by telling us a powerful story, having a narrative ready to go. Maybe that story is based upon a case that you want to talk about in a specific instance. So the idea here is that you can open however you'd like to. Some people will shock us. They'll say something which is shocking and getting our attention, and then they'll explain how we arrived at this point. While still others will simply take us through the process step by step so that the reader has an understanding. Your job is to consider your audience, consider the paper, and the length of it. How much time and energy and space do you want to put into any given area? But the introduction is always a place that you have the most flexibility in leaving. In an introduction, some people choose to start with an epigraph. It's totally optional. Let's say your paper is about civil service and you decide that you want to create a nice theme. What you might do is beneath the title, place an epigraph, something like, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. This was said by John F. Kennedy. This was based upon his appeal to Americans for civil service. And because it's so well known, it might be a great way to encapsulate your paper. Still, some people will put a powerful quote from a well-known individual at the end of the paper. These are fine, but there's one thing to emphasize. You do not need to quote them. You do not need to break those quotes down afterwards. You will put them, you'll cite them, but you don't have to go forward further in the quote. You don't have to explain it further if you don't want to. Now, if you want to put an explanation in the introduction, tie those things together, if you want to tie it back together in the conclusion, those are great ways to add structure to your paper and add a little bit of style as well, but they're not necessary. We do need a hook for the paper. The hook is to get our attention, to grab us and keep us. And that's where you want to decide where that journalistic element comes in, or the shocking element comes in, or the narrative-driven element comes in. After you've decided how to open, tell us about your topic. What are you writing about? What does the prompt want you to focus on? If you only have a handful of authors, then you might consider, or key resources, you might consider giving them to us in the paper proper. You might say in the introduction proper. You might do that because there's not that many. However, if you're doing a larger project that involves, say, a literature review, then you're going to be taking multiple authors and resources. It could be 10, 20, even 30 of them or more. If that's the case, then you don't need to synthesize them all in one place. But if you have one primary author, three primary authors, you might talk about them, you might explain what they have to do with each other. Themes. These are going to be the major elements of your paper that are weaved throughout your paper, I should say. These themes will be your choosing, but usually the parts that are most interesting to you are going to be the parts that are most interesting to the reader, and you can use themes throughout the paper to make sure to emphasize and re-emphasize points. What's nice about the 5-paragraph essay, in a way, is that the introduction is an overall understanding of what the paper will be. That's going to provide us with a thesis, a final argument. After that, you support each of those arguments in your body paragraphs, and then in the conclusion, you'll restate everything. So the themes are going to run throughout the entire paper, and it's going to be a way to tie everything together. When you're through with all that information, the thesis, primary argument, or the research question, depending on the type of project you're doing, this is going to encapsulate the entire paper. If for any reason I get lost as your reader later in the work, then I should be able to return to your introduction, look for the thesis, and then see that it's strong, and that is what I'm tying the paper to. And by the way, this anchor point works for you, the writer, as well. This anchor point is going to allow you to stay on track or to make the connections. Oftentimes, you'll be writing and the question will come up, do I need this? Or is this strong enough? Or have I said enough? Go back to your thesis and look at the original points of the paper and then see, are the connections there? If not, you're either going to develop them or even remove them. Each body paragraph is going to have a similar structure, but they all, of course, look very different. We need strong topic sentences, and you'll support those topic sentences as best you can with as many sentences as is necessary. A strong topic sentence should encapsulate the entire paragraph. Oftentimes, what people will do is they will write long paragraphs, but something will seem missing, and this will be throughout the paper. So there's a few tips you can use in body paragraphs to keep things simple. One of them is to make sure that you have a strong topic sentence. And if you do not have a strong topic sentence, look in the paragraph to see, is there a sentence that you can move up that tells us what the whole thing is about? Another element of it, are the sentences that are within the body paragraph all about the same topic? You might have too much in a paragraph. If that's the case, split them into a couple of paragraphs. And then there's one other thing about topic sentences across the entire paper. That is to say that if you want to know if your paper is working, just read the topic sentences. If your paper still makes sense by the end of it, then your topic sentences are working, your paper is well organized. If your paper falls apart or things are a bit wishy-washy, a lot of times it means that the topic sentences have been buried or aren't there. So feel free, if you've written a paragraph or two, and things aren't really coming together, to try to synthesize them into a topic sentence to try to bring things back to a place that works for you. The supporting sentences can come in any form that you see fit. Sometimes they're going to be definitions and explanations. Sometimes they'll tell us who's involved. But just consider that you provide as much support as is necessary before you then give us the quotes and data. These quotes and data are going to be cited. They're going to be backed. You'll put them in APA format. But a quote is, whether it's long or short, if it is a short quote, it might only be a line long, up to 3. If it is longer, if your quote goes onto a 4th line, it is known as a block quote. You can bring any data you'd like to into public administration papers, and APA format allows you to take the quotes and the data and put them into tables, graphs, charts, or several other different ways to express the data other than just writing it in paragraph form. In fact, with some of our papers, if you have a lot of data, then it might even be worthwhile not to put the information into paragraph form at all in itself. Instead, you place it into a chart or a table and you give it to us raw. After that, in a paragraph, you explain its value and tell us what's necessary. But if you're finding that it's difficult to write paragraphs or it's difficult to hit your lengths because the information is too technical, consider putting it into chart, graph, or table. Once you've done that, then you analyze it. When you are providing analysis, you are explaining what it has to do, what the data has to do with your arguments. So for some people, they'll say, I'm not sure what to say about this data. It seems very straightforward. And that might indeed be the case. The data might be self-evident, but the question is, how does it apply to what you're writing about? Finally, you transition where appropriate. The transition sentence should tie together the paragraphs themselves, and if your paper feels a little disjointed, it's more than likely because of a weak transition. When you're through, you provide us with a conclusion. Restate core ideas from the paper, give us your final thoughts, and if you started with a hook, close that hook. Ultimately, in the 5-paragraph essay format, I've said it's flexible, and the reason I say that is because 5 paragraphs can easily be turned into 5 pages in outline form. If you know that you're going to write a paper that's only going to be 2 pages long, the 5-paragraph essay is a great format. But if you need 5 pages, then you might consider doing 5 pages, a page for the intro, a page for the conclusion, and then 3 pages, one for each body page now. If it's a 10-page paper or a 20-page paper, you do the math. 2 pages each, 4 pages each, you get the idea. But also consider something. If you happen to have topics in that extend beyond 3, you don't have a 5-paragraph essay anymore, and that's fine. The purpose of this structure is just to be applicable to what you need. So if you have 10 body paragraphs because the topic is that complicated, that's fine. The reason we're doing this is so that you don't get lost and so that your reader doesn't get lost and so that we can communicate in such a way that people can find what they need without too much difficulty. Now, when it comes to citations, I've mentioned them several times. There's 2 types we worry about: in-text citations and references. The in-text citations are the author, year, and page number often put into the paper paragraph by paragraph, point by point. The reference page, works cited page, or bibliography, call it what you will, is the final page that's going to provide us with all the details, the specific details about your sources, where you find them. Oftentimes, you can find bibliographical information in peer-reviewed articles at the end themselves. So if you happen to pull a document from another paper that you're reading, you may want to cite it if it's actually an APA format written paper. The same is true if you're using Rutgers Library. There are programs like RefWorks, which will actually help you with creating bibliographies. And even in Microsoft Word and other word processors, there are ways to do it as well. It's not the fastest if you choose to use the references section of Microsoft Word, just because you're putting in information and then it's collating something for you. It could be faster and easier, and it might stick much better if you learn to do it the appropriate way. And that can be found in the APA Style Guide, the Purdue OWL APA Style Guide, and also you will learn to do it throughout your papers. But if you're having any issues concerning APA format, I definitely recommend that you make an appointment with the Writing Center and we can go through your papers proper. When it comes to the different types of formats out there, we use APA, the American Psychological Association style. Public administration papers tend to be written in a similar fashion to psychology papers or sociology papers. Indeed, when we're doing this work and gathering data, it is a social science, and that's why we use the APA format primarily. MLA, most people are familiar with from their English papers, and Chicago style, most people are familiar with because it's the most common style that most publications are written in. If you've read many books, newspapers, magazines, they tend to be written in Chicago style. Its style is best identified when you see footnotes or endnotes. Now, I want to point out that APA does allow for footnotes. It does allow for endnotes. However, it can't be used for bibliographical information. So if you are writing APA format and you want to put in a footnote, that footnote should be an addendum to the paper itself. It should be something additional to what we are looking for, to what you want to explain. And the real question becomes, why did you put it as a footnote as opposed to just putting it into the paper proper? But if you feel like the information would flow better as a footnote, you feel free. You just can't use it instead of a bibliography. And as I said, online resources are very good. The APA Style Guide and the Purdue OWL APA Style Guide. Now, if you're doing all of this work, you're citing things properly, then one question that comes up often is, how do you expand your paper? How do you get length out of it? And so these next few slides are designed as filters. They're designed to give you a sense of what types of topics are in the majority of public administration papers, the types of questions you can ask that are going to consistently provide results. Now, before I say anything about this slide, let me just say the journalistic questions are always on the table. Who, what, when, where, why, how many, how often, how much. We're always asking questions about the time, the actors involved, the people being served, and how it impacts the environment around us. So if you want to write strong papers and you want to get into a good set of habits that can take you throughout the entire program, then you're going to want to take the information that you find and keep putting it back into the context of your courses. Some of you might decide that it's worth your time and energy to focus on one particular area. Maybe it's social services, maybe it's education, maybe it's healthcare. Whatever it happens to be, it's fine to write the majority of your papers in those topic areas. If you're in a position, in a job right now that you want to climb in, you might want to focus on the area that you're in. I would just emphasize that if you're interested in this and you want to have a strong through line, make sure to talk to your academic advisor, make sure to talk to your professors when you're doing it so that you get the most out of the experience. That being said, organization types that are always important. Public, nonprofit, or private. What type of organization is it? If you're writing about an instance with a public-private partnership, you're going to want to let us know what's the public portion of it, what is the private portion of it, and how do these two sectors stay involved with each other. If we're talking about levels of government, federal government, state government, local government, some people will do international comparisons. It's often common for students to do state by state comparisons or to compare localities within a state. Whatever you've chosen to do early on in the paper, typically in the introduction, you're going to want to let us know what the scope and scale of the project will be. And that includes whatever you decide as internal. Let's say you are staying within the state of New Jersey, but you only want to talk about New Jersey cities. That's fine. Everything within New Jersey that falls under that criteria, the urban criteria, fits. You might define suburban and rural differently. They no longer fit. They are external. And everything outside of New Jersey is external. You want to set this up, but you'll always be establishing in your papers how far you wish to go, because oftentimes with public administration, it's easy to go on a tangent that will take you in a completely different direction. And frankly, there are books written about this stuff, classes on this stuff. So what you want to do is make sure that you target, you focus, and a strong thesis sentence and strong topic sentences can make sure that that remains tight. The first thing about perspectives, this perspective is about what's going on in the paper. What is going on politically about the topic? Socially, Why is it important? Economically, what are the costs? What are the benefits of the issue you're discussing? Culture, community, religion, and ethics are all important and will remain so. But at the same time, they may not fit in each and every paper. Now, if you're doing a paper in ethics, of course you're going to have an ethical perspective. At the same time, if you are doing public budgeting, that may not be the case. So you pick and choose which perspectives are strongest for the arguments that you're making. Now, if perspectives are what, the key stakeholders are about who. Who are the political actors, the politicians, the constituents involved? Who are the administrators involved? Who are the organizations? And then amongst those organizations, if there are service providers, what do they do? And who are the clients they serve? So as an example, if you are talking about education, the service providers may be principals and teachers, whereas the clients are going to be students and their families. If you're talking about healthcare, those same service providers would be doctors and nurses, and then the clients would be patients and their families. If you're going, let's say that you have 9 pages and you need 10, go with public opinion. People vote, they pay taxes, and they complain constantly. And we measure it. We love it. We look at surveys, we look at interviews, we will call people, we will stop people, we want to know what's going on. We want to know what's going on with the public, and we measure them in various ways. So public opinion is usually a strong way to add length to your paper in a way that will be consistent and actually allow you to add to your analysis if you want to talk about things like transparency, accountability, trust, and many other things that deal with the public. There's a lot of different methods of exposition. I've talked a lot about narration, and I've talked a little bit about the process, but I want to throw a few more things in there. This can be used for brainstorming, and this can be used as a proper structure of your paper. You can do a cause and effect analysis, compare and contrast. Maybe you are classifying and dividing. Feel free to use case studies, examples, and analogies. If you have to use a definition, by all means, let us know, but also provide examples to help that definition stick with the reader. And also, if there is no proper definition, feel free just to give a general description. There's a lot to say about analysis of quotes and data, and we will do that extensively in a future workshop. But for right now, just know that this is not a comprehensive list of everything that you can use. These styles, though, should help you get started. When it comes to analysis, just a couple of things that should be mentioned. First, there's a contextual relationship that we want to examine. So as I mentioned earlier, what you're talking about concerning your data is important, but it's just as important to relate it to your paper, your courses, or whatever the intent is. So in this particular case, always pay attention to the context in which you're writing. Every quote you use needs to be analyzed. Every bit of data you use also needs to be analyzed. So in this body paragraph structure that we talked about previously, I want to reemphasize that the data does not go first or last. Your topic sentences, your words, your voice goes first. Then provide us with support, then give us quotes and data. Once you've done that, tell us what it means in relation to your topic sentence or your thesis. And then once that's done, you can transition to the next portion. But the author, other authors should not speak for you. And the way to keep your voice strong is to make sure that in the introduction and in the conclusion, your voice is paramount, and that in the body paragraphs, your voice comes first and last. If more than a third of your paper is made of quotes, you're probably overquoting. Your professors may put your papers through Turnitin, you may put your papers through Safe Assign, and there's a such thing as an unoriginal content percentage. There's going to be some level of unoriginality to a paper that's cited because you're supposed to quote. It might be 10%, it may be 20%, but if your paper has more than 20%, then you start to move into the area of perhaps bringing in too many outside sources. At that point, you expand your analysis. That's not to say cut the quotes necessarily, that's to say write more on your behalf. If you quote something that's 1 line long, write an analysis that is also 1 line long or more. If it's a paragraph, bring a paragraph back, but it's about proportion. If more than 33% of the paper is quoted, you've overquoted. At that point, it's time to write a lot more from your voice. And we can talk about cuts concerning outside content, but it's really about prioritization. And that's something I would definitely talk to your professor about or make an appointment with the Writing Center if you'd like to go into greater details, because there is a lot to say there. Uh, Finally, try to avoid mixing the author's thoughts with your own in the same sentence. If you're pulling a quote that's powerful, put it in, provide the appropriate guidance, give the author, give the year, give the page number, and then say what you have to say. But try to avoid taking sentences that you really like from elsewhere and then applying most of that sentence wholesale into your own analysis. It tends to cause confusion and it can lead to plagiarism issues. So keep quotes and data separate from your own analysis as much as possible. There's one more really powerful thing you can do throughout your work and while reading others. It serves you when you're doing your own reviews. It serves you when you are studying someone else's work. Circle keywords, underline key phrases in any given sentence or paragraph. If you pick a quote and you really like it, or you pick a piece of data, consider why you chose it. Identify it by circling it or underlining it, depending on if it's a word, phrase, or piece of data, and then examine its meaning. Examine why it's important in isolation. Forget the rest of the sentence and all of that. Focus instead just on the issue at hand, and then do some light writing to the side to break it down. And then once you've done that, put it back into sentence format. But use these types of breakdowns to isolate and use these breakdowns then to expand where necessary. This will be covered in a future workshop in much greater detail. As I was mentioning earlier concerning keeping a strong voice, make sure you write clearly for your intended audience. Don't quote in the intro or the conclusion, not in the topic sentence or in the final sentences of a paragraph. And don't add any new information into the conclusion. If you do, make sure that the information you put there is found in the body. Feel free to move that information up so that you can examine it more so. We are going to ask throughout public administration papers that you write objectively unless you are specifically told otherwise. So writing objectively is keeping to the facts based upon the evidence. We're not looking for your opinion. We're looking for evidence-based research. And you'll cite that evidence when you're going through your paper to provide as much of a solid foundation as you can. That being said, if you're asked for your opinion, give it. If you're asked to give a personal recommendation, if you're asked in a response paper to give your opinion, then by all means do so. What would you do? How would you handle it? What are your recommendations? What type of leadership or management style would you employ? All of that is fine, but just make sure that it's a part of the assignment first so that there's no bias that can be detected. That being said, if you start a sentence with one of these phrases, I think, I feel, or I believe, you're going to give an opinion next. So, in order to make sure that you stick to the evidence, speak specifically about the area. Take yourself out of it. Don't use I at all, if possible. Just focus on the topic at hand. And if something is debatable, or if there are different sides that need to be considered, then present both. If one is stronger than the other, provide evidence as to why that's true. But it's not beholden upon you to say, I am going to explain why one is more important than the other because of anecdotal evidence and that is to say, personal experience I might have or stories I've heard from others. Always make sure to find as much evidence as you can. And oftentimes, what you're reading, since everybody has the same job, that expands beyond public administration. Take a look at what the authors you're reading are using to justify their claims. And oftentimes, you can do the same. One note about common errors. Many people are fine writers. They're capable in many ways because of their professions. At this level, most people have had plenty of experience writing, but there might be a few common things that are done repeatedly that make it seem like the writing is not up to par. So common things that are seen, that common mistakes, articles like the, a, and an, prepositions. So anything that adds direction. There's easily people can be confused, especially if English isn't your first language, when you say I am, instead of saying I am in a city on an island, you might say I am on a city in an island. Oftentimes, if for prepositional issues, you want to say it out loud and see how does it sound to your ear. If it sounds off, there's probably an issue there. Verb tense, you can use past, present, future, but be consistent. Try to avoid jumping between them because it usually causes grammatical issues somewhere in the sentence structure. And then subject verb agreement as well as pronoun antecedent agreement. Make sure that when you're writing that that the reader can follow your logic, your train of thought. And if you're talking about multiple actors, make sure that the verbs that you're using match that. So a simple example may be a boy walks, the boys walk. Where you place the S matters, and it's easy to slip up, especially if you're talking about more than one group of people. It's very common. Don't let it bother you. But make sure that if you are habitually making certain mistakes, if they become patterns, that's when we decide to focus on how to eliminate those entirely. Be aware of repetition. Try to avoid putting the same words in the same sentences twice or more. Make sure your vocabulary matches and is appropriate for the paper you're writing. Be aware of abstract language, and that's also acronyms. Things like slang may not translate very well. When you're using acronyms that are in your profession, everyone that's outside of your organization might be clueless as to what you're talking about, even if it's the most common thing and you do it every day. And then finally, when it comes to punctuation, it's really common that people will have issues with commas or issues with semicolons and that sort of thing. At this level, what we tend to do is look for those patterns and then address them as they arise. But if you're having any issues at all with any of these, then I would highly recommend making an appointment with the Writing Center. Ultimately, there's multiple ways to improve your writing, and the number one way to do that is to practice. Make sure that you're reading, and it's really helpful to join the conversation and read things that fit what you're currently studying. Keep abreast of current events through books, magazines, newspapers. And when you're writing your papers, take a look at academic journals. Take a look at peer-reviewed articles. How are they addressing your topics? Because oftentimes you'll be doing very similar things, and you might actually use some of these academic journal articles or peer-reviewed articles as bases to do your own work. Remember to brainstorm. Make sure to give yourself the time to write, and give yourself the time to revise. Try not to do it all at once. If you try to do it all at once, then that's the easiest way to make mistakes. If you give yourself a chance to write through drafts, multiple drafts will give you the opportunity to make sure that everything is as clean as you can make it. And if you don't know something, look it up. Google it. Often use Rutgers Library. Use Wikipedia. While you can't cite encyclopedias, you can't cite dictionaries, you can't cite the sources, they're great references and you should absolutely use them, especially if your professor hands you a peer-reviewed article that seems like a completely foreign language. By all means, bone up on the topic in a simpler context. Use Wikipedia, use Google, read about the topic in newspapers so that you can wrap your mind around it. Because oftentimes when you're looking at peer-reviewed articles and really advanced things, they're not written for a general audience. They're written by academics for academics or written by scientists for scientists. And what you'll have to do as a researcher is apply all that information. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed the session. My name is Terry Hall. You can find me at SPAA in room 125. My phone number is 973-353-2571. You can always email me, tlh135@newark.rutgers.edu. This semester, we are going to remain online. And so should you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to reach out to me and I'll get back to you as promptly as possible. Thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'll take them now.